Grace Sinclair had killed her husband. At least that's what everyone in New Orleans believed. And as she knelt in the Arizona desert, lips cracked, vision fading, she wondered if they were right. Did she deserve to die here alone in the middle of nowhere? But then a shadow appeared, tall, moving like a warrior, not a rancher. When he lifted her, Grace saw something in his eyes, not kindness, recognition. As if he too had been running from something, as if he too had killed someone. 2 days later, when Grace woke in a stranger's room and learned the name of the man who saved her, Cole Hartley, she didn't yet know that name once carried another title, the Reaper, hired gun, killer, and the man she was falling in love with. If you want to know whether love can redeem two sinners, subscribe to our channel and follow Grace's story to the very end. Comment below with the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. I killed my husband, widow collapses in desert, saved by Gunslinger, hiding darker secrets. Grace Sinclair's knees hit the scorching Arizona dirt, and she didn't have the strength to get back up. Her medical bag slipped from her fingers, instruments scattering across sand that burned like coals from hell. The desert sun pressed down through her bonnet with merciless intensity, and somewhere in her fading thoughts, she wondered if this was God's justice for a woman who couldn't save her own husband. 26 years old, 2,000 miles from everything she'd ever known. And now she would die alone beside a stranger's water trough with no one to mourn her twice. She never saw the cowboy running toward her. 3 days earlier, Grace had boarded the stagecoach in Tucson with nothing but her medical bag, a carpet bag of worn dresses, and $17 sewn into her corset. The other passengers had stared at her dark traveling clothes and looked away quickly, the way people always did when confronted with death's shadow. She didn't blame them. She'd spent 2 years being that shadow in New Orleans, watching her late husband's family cross the street to avoid her hearing their whispers at church that followed her like a second skin. She killed him. She was his nurse before she became his wife. She should have saved him. The yellow fever hadn't cared about her nursing skills. It hadn't cared that she'd stayed awake for 6 days straight, pressing cold cloths to Thomas's burning forehead, begging God for a miracle that never came. Thomas had died on a Tuesday morning, quietly, his hand in hers, his eyes already seeing somewhere she couldn't follow. "I'm sorry," he'd whispered. "I'm sorry I'm leaving you alone." Those were his last words. Not "I love you," not "be happy," just an apology for abandoning her to face his mother's accusations and the cold silence of a city that had never truly accepted her. Grace had stopped wearing full mourning black 6 months ago, but she still felt its weight on her shoulders every single day. "Copper Springs." The stagecoach driver's voice jolted her from memory. 20 miles ahead, folks. We'll be there before sundown." Grace straightened in her seat, trying to summon enthusiasm for her new life. Dr. Henry Morrison had answered her letter within 2 weeks, his handwriting shaky, but his words warm. "We need a trained nurse desperately. The mining company brings injuries daily, and I'm too old to handle them alone. Room and board provided, salary modest, but fair. Please come quickly." She'd read that letter 40 times on the journey west. Each time she found new hope in those simple words, "Please come quickly." Someone needed her. Someone wanted her skills, not her husband's family name, not her father's printing business connections. Just her. Grace Sinclair, the woman who couldn't save Thomas, but maybe could save someone else. "Ma'am?" The young man across from her leaned forward. He'd been trying to make conversation since Tucson, his eyes lingering too long on her face. "You got family waiting in Copper Springs?" "No." "Husband?" "No." He smiled, encouraged by her single status. "Well, maybe I could." "I'm a widow, sir, recently. I'm not looking for company." The lie came easily now. 2 years wasn't recent, but it shut down unwanted attention faster than the truth. The young man sat back, his smile fading. "My apologies, ma'am. Didn't mean no disrespect." Grace turned her face to the window and watched the desert roll past. Red rocks and saguaro cacti, dust devils spinning in the distance. A landscape so different from New Orleans' humid streets that it felt like another planet entirely. Maybe that was the point. Maybe she needed another planet. The stagecoach lurched suddenly, throwing passengers against each other. Grace grabbed the seat edge as the driver cursed loudly overhead. "Whoa, whoa, damn you!" The coach stopped hard and Grace heard the driver jump down. Through the window, she could see one of the horses limping badly, its front leg held at an awkward angle. "Stone bruise," the driver announced, appearing at the coach door. "Bad one. Horse can't pull." "What does that mean for us?" asked the businessman in the bowler hat. "Means we ain't going nowhere fast." The driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "I got to walk this horse slow or he'll go lame permanent. Copper Springs is still about 18 miles out. We'll get there, but it'll be tomorrow morning, not tonight." "Tomorrow morning," Grace's voice came out sharper than intended. "I was expected today. Dr. Morrison." "Doc Morrison ain't going to die waiting one more night, ma'am." The driver's tone made clear he didn't care about her schedule. "We camp here till the horse can move proper." Grace looked at the barren landscape. No buildings, no shade except the coach itself, and the sun directly overhead, beating down with merciless intensity. "There ain't no other option," the young man said. "You got two legs, don't you?" The driver laughed at his own joke. "Mesquite Creek Ranch is about 3 miles northeast. If any of you fancy a walk in this heat, you might find someone there willing to take you the rest of the way. Otherwise, sit tight and stop complaining." The businessman and the young man exchanged looks, but made no move to leave the coach's meager shade. Grace did the calculation in her head: 3 miles to a ranch, 15 more to Copper Springs. If she could reach the ranch, perhaps she could hire transportation arrive only a few hours late instead of a full day. Dr. Morrison had written, "Please come quickly." Those words mattered. "Which direction is the ranch?" she asked. The driver pointed northeast. "Follow the wheel ruts. They lead to the main road, and there's a sign for Mesquite Creek about 2 miles in. Can't miss it." He looked her up and down, taking in her city shoes and pale complexion. "You ain't seriously thinking of walking, are you, ma'am?" "I'm seriously thinking of arriving when I said I would. It's 3 miles in Arizona summer. That ain't like walking 3 miles back east." Grace grabbed her medical bag and her carpet bag. "I've survived worse than a walk, sir." It was bravado, and she knew it. But she'd rather collapse trying than sit in that coach for 18 hours being reminded with every passing minute that she was inconvenient, unwanted in the way. Story of her life. "Suit yourself." The driver shrugged. "Your funeral." The first mile wasn't terrible. Grace had wrapped her shawl around her bonnet for extra protection and kept her pace steady. Not too fast, not too slow. The wheel ruts were easy to follow, and the landscape, while harsh, held a stark beauty she could almost appreciate. The second mile, the heat began its assault in earnest. Her dress, practical brown cotton, not the heavy morning black she'd finally abandoned, clung to her back with sweat. Her boots, purchased in New Orleans and never tested on rough terrain, rubbed blisters into her heels. The carpet bag grew heavier with each step, and her medical bag, filled with instruments, bandages, and medicines, felt like it contained lead weights. She stopped to rest in the shadow of a large rock, drinking sparingly from her canteen. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but she'd never appreciated anything more. "You can do this," she told herself. "You've done harder things." She'd held Thomas while he died. She'd stood at his grave while his mother refused to look at her. She'd packed her entire life into 2 bags and boarded a train heading west, leaving behind everything familiar. 3 miles was nothing. 3 miles was... The rock's shadow shifted as clouds passed overhead, and Grace realized with horror that she'd been resting for nearly an hour. The sun had moved. The afternoon was advancing, and she still had at least a mile to go. She forced herself upright, ignoring the screaming protest from her feet, and continued walking. The third mile broke her. Not dramatically, not with a scream or a cry, just quietly, gradually, the way everything in Grace's life seemed to fall apart. One step became harder than the last. Her vision began to blur at the edges. Her thoughts scattered like startled birds. Water trough. She saw it in the distance. A wooden structure beside a fence, clearly part of someone's property. The ranch. She'd reached the ranch, or close enough. Grace's legs gave out 30 feet from the trough. She crawled the rest of the way, her medical bag dragging in the dirt behind her, her pride long since evaporated in the Arizona heat. The water in the trough was meant for animals, and she didn't care. She plunged her hands in, splashing her face, drinking from her cupped palms. It was the most beautiful water she'd ever tasted. Then darkness crept in from the edges of her vision, and she didn't have the strength to fight it. "I'm sorry, Thomas," she thought, though she didn't know why she was apologizing. "I'm sorry, I couldn't make it." Grace collapsed beside the water trough, and the Arizona sun continued blazing overhead without sympathy. Cole Hartley had spent the morning moving cattle from the south pasture to the east, and his mood was as foul as the weather was brutal. Hotter than Satan's kitchen out here, his ranch hand Pete had observed that morning. Cole had grunted in response. He wasn't much for conversation on good days, and today wasn't a good day. Last night's letter from Blackwood Mining Company still burned in his pocket like a brand. Final offer for your water rights. Accept or face consequences. Richard Blackwood. Richard Blackwood could go to hell. Cole's grandfather had claimed this land 40 years ago, and no amount of money or threats would make Cole surrender what his family had built, even if that family was now just him and the memory of a sister he hadn't been able to save. Boss, one of his ranch hands, a young man named Tomas, rode up beside him. There's something by the West Water Trough. Thought it was a dead coyote at first, but I think it's a person. Cole spurred his horse forward without another word. Dead bodies on his land meant trouble. Murder investigations, accusations, delays he couldn't afford during the busiest season. What he found wasn't a dead body. It was a woman sprawled unconscious in the dirt beside his water trough. Her face was flushed, an alarming shade of red, her breathing shallow and rapid. Cole dismounted in one fluid motion. Ma'am, can you hear me? No response. He touched her forehead and cursed, hot as a branding iron. Tomas, ride to the house. Tell Maria to prepare the guest room and bring cold water. Lots of it, now. The young man took off at a gallop while Cole assessed the situation. The woman's bags lay scattered nearby, a medical bag he noted with surprise and a carpet bag that had seen better days. Her dress was practical, but city-made. Her boots entirely wrong for desert terrain. Easterner, clearly. What the hell was she doing out here alone? He lifted her carefully, one arm under her knees, the other supporting her back. She weighed almost nothing, and something about that made his chest tight with an emotion he didn't care to examine. Hold on, he said, though she couldn't hear him. Just hold on, so I am. Grace woke to darkness in confusion. She was lying on something soft. A bed, her mind supplied slowly. Not the ground, not the stagecoach. A real bed with actual sheets. And she was alive. Easy now, a woman's voice warm and accented. Don't try to sit up yet. You've had quite the adventure, mija. Grace turned her head to see a Mexican woman in her 40s pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. The woman smiled with genuine kindness. Where am I? Mesquite Creek Ranch. Mr. Hartley found you by the water trough 3 hours ago. You almost died from the heat. I needed to reach Copper Springs. Grace's voice came out as a croak. The stagecoach horse went lame, and you thought walking 18 miles in Arizona summer was a solution. The woman clicked her tongue. It was only 3 miles to the ranch. 3 miles too many, apparently. Grace tried to smile, but her lips were too cracked. The woman set down the cloth and offered a cup of water. Drink slowly. I'm Maria, by the way. I manage the house here. Clara drank gratefully, the cool water soothing her raw throat. Thank you. I'm Grace Sinclair. I'm supposed to be the new nurse in Copper Springs. Maria's eyebrows rose. A nurse, Doc Morrison, has been waiting for you. He mentioned a letter. I was supposed to arrive today. You almost arrived in a pine box instead. Maria's tone was sharp but not unkind. The doctor can wait one more day. You need rest. Grace tried to sit up despite the warning, and the room spun violently. She fell back against the pillow with a groan. Told you. Maria tucked the blankets around her firmly. Sleep now. Tomorrow you can argue about leaving. Grace wanted to protest, but exhaustion pulled her under before she could form the words. She woke again to morning light and the sound of voices outside her door. She's still asleep, Mr. Cole. Maria's voice. It's been 12 hours. Shouldn't she be awake by now? Heat exhaustion takes time to recover from. A man's voice, deep and rough with worry. She'll wake when her body's ready. Grace opened her eyes, fully taking in the room around her. Simple but clean. Wooden walls, a colorful woven rug, curtains that filtered the harsh Arizona light into something softer. Someone had removed her boots in outer dress, leaving her in her chemise and petticoat beneath the blankets. She should have felt embarrassed, but mostly she felt grateful to be alive. I'm awake, she called, her voice stronger than before. The door opened immediately, and Maria entered first, followed by a man who had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. Grace's breath caught. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorway and hands that looked capable of breaking things or building them with equal ease. His dark hair was shot through with silver at the temples, and his eyes were the gray-blue of storm clouds over the desert. He was also staring at her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of her disheveled state. "Ma'am," he removed his hat, revealing more of that salt and pepper hair. "I'm Cole Hartley. This is my ranch." Grace Sinclair. She tried to sit up and this time managed it without the room spinning. "I understand you saved my life. Just happened to find you. Nothing heroic about it." Maria snorted. "He rode faster than I've ever seen him move, carried you half a mile to the house, and sat outside your door for 3 hours making sure you were still breathing. But sure, nothing heroic." The man Cole shot Maria a warning look that she cheerfully ignored. "Thank you," Grace said simply. "Truly." He nodded once, sharp and uncomfortable with gratitude. "Maria says you're a nurse heading to Doc Morrison's." "Yes, I was supposed to arrive yesterday. The stagecoach had trouble. A horse went lame." Something flickered in his gray-blue eyes. "The driver said it would be tomorrow before they could move. I decided to walk." "That was foolish." "Probably." Grace felt a spark of irritation beneath her gratitude. "Definitely. I made a miscalculation. It won't happen again." "Reckon it won't, seeing as you nearly died from the first one." They stared at each other across the room, and Grace realized with surprise that she wasn't intimidated by his bluntness. It was refreshing, actually. No false sympathy, no careful dancing around uncomfortable truths. "I need to get to Copper Springs," she said. "Today, if possible. Dr. Morrison is expecting me." "Today?" Cole's tone made clear what he thought of that idea. "You collapsed from heat exhaustion less than 24 hours ago, and I've recovered sufficiently to travel." "Have you tried standing?" Grace pushed back the blankets and swung her legs over the edge of the bed, ignoring Maria's protest. She stood and immediately sat back down as her legs buckled. "That's what I thought." Cole's expression held no satisfaction, just grim confirmation. "You're staying another day at least. Tomorrow morning, if you can stand without falling, I'll take you to Copper Springs myself." "I can't impose." "You already have." The words were harsh, but his tone wasn't. Might as well see it through. He turned and left without waiting for her response, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Maria watched him go with a knowing smile. "Don't mind Mr. Cole. He's not good with words, but his heart's in the right place. He seems direct. He's been alone too long, forgot how to talk soft to people, especially women." Maria gathered the cold cloths from the bedside table. "I'll bring you breakfast. Real food, not just broth. You need your strength if you're going to keep arguing with that stubborn man." Grace found herself smiling despite everything. "I appreciate your help, Maria, both of you." "Help is what neighbors do out here, even when the neighbor is a stranger who nearly died on your property." Maria paused at the door. "He's a good man, you know. Mr. Cole, don't let the rough edges fool you." She left, and Grace was alone with her thoughts in the morning light, in the lingering memory of the storm cloud eyes filled with the concern for a woman he'd never met. The day passed slowly, marked by meals Maria brought to her room, brief appearances from Cole to check on her recovery, and long stretches of quiet that Grace filled with thoughts she'd been avoiding for months. She examined her near-death experience with clinical detachment. The symptoms had been textbook heat exhaustion, progressing toward heat stroke. Another hour in the sun and she would have died. Simple as that. And yet something about the simplicity troubled her. She had walked into the desert knowing the risks. She had pushed herself beyond reasonable limits. She had, some small part of her whispered, been almost hoping for an end to the grief that weighed on her every waking moment. Number. Grace rejected the thought fiercely. I wanted to reach Copper Springs. I wanted to start my new life. I wasn't trying to. But had she been trying to really live? Or just going through motions, running from New Orleans, from memories, from the accusations in her mother-in-law's eyes? The questions had no easy answers. So Grace did what she always did. She focused on practical matters. Her medical bag had survived the ordeal intact. Maria had cleaned her dress and hung it to dry. Her boots, while damaged, were wearable. Tomorrow she would continue her journey to Copper Springs, begin her work with Dr. Morrison, and build something new from the ashes of her old life. That evening, Cole knocked on her door. "Come in." He entered carrying a tray with 2 cups of coffee and a piece of pie. "Maria said you haven't eaten enough today. She's of the opinion that pea cures most ailments." Grace accepted the coffee gratefully. "Maria seems like a wise woman. Wisest person I know." He pulled a chair to the bedside and sat his long legs stretched out before him. "How are you feeling?" "Better, truly. I could probably travel tonight if you couldn't." His tone broke no argument. "But tomorrow morning, if you're improved, I'll hitch the wagon and take you to town." "That's very kind." "It's practical. Doc Morrison has been complaining about needing help for 2 years. The faster you get there, the faster he stops complaining." Grace smiled at his gruff deflection. "Do you know Dr. Morrison well?" "Well enough. He set my arm when I broke it 10 years back, and he's been threatening to retire ever since I can remember." Cole sipped his coffee. "Good man. Town needs him, but he's 70 if he's a day, and the mining accidents don't care about his age." "That's why I'm here, to help with the workload." "Why?" The question was direct typically. "You're a trained nurse, could have worked anywhere back east. Why come all the way to Arizona?" Grace considered lying, then decided against it. This man had saved her life. He deserved honesty. "My husband died 2 years ago, yellow fever. I was his nurse before I was his wife, and when he got sick, everyone assumed I could save him." She kept her voice steady through long practice. "I couldn't. He died despite everything I tried, and his family blamed me." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "That's a heavy burden to carry." "Yes. And running across the country helps." "I wasn't running." The words came automatically. "Ain't that the same thing?" Grace looked at him sharply, ready to defend herself, and found no judgment in his gray-blue eyes. Just understanding. "Maybe," she admitted, "but starting over means building something new. Running is just running. And which are you doing?" "I'm trying to figure that out." He nodded slowly, accepting the answer. "My sister died in childbirth 6 years ago," he said quietly. "She was alone on a homestead 50 miles from the nearest doctor. By the time anyone knew something was wrong, it was too late." The words hung between them, weighted with shared grief. "I'm sorry," Grace said softly. "Me too. Every day." He finished his coffee and stood. "Get some rest, Miss Sinclair. Tomorrow's a long ride to town." "Grace," she said as he paused at the door. "Pardon. My name is Grace. If I'm going to be indebted to you for saving my life, you should at least call me by my given name." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. "All right, Grace. I'm Cole, and you don't owe me anything. Just don't go dying on my property, too much paperwork." He left, and Grace found herself smiling at the closed door, the first genuine smile she could remember in months. The wagon ride to Copper Springs took 4 hours, and Grace spent most of it stealing glances at the man beside her. Cole drove with the same quiet competence he seemed to bring to everything. His hands on the reins were steady, his posture relaxed but alert. He didn't fill the silence with unnecessary chatter, and Grace found herself grateful for that. She'd had enough empty words to last a lifetime. "Town's just ahead," Cole said, finally nodding toward a cluster of buildings emerging from the desert haze. "Doc Morrison's place is on the main street. Can't miss it got a sign that's been hanging crooked for 15 years. You've known him a long time. Long enough to know he'll work you harder than you've ever been worked." Cole glanced at her. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I didn't come all this way to rest." Something like approval flickered in his gray-blue eyes. "No, I reckon you didn't." They entered Copper Springs in mid-morning, and Grace felt the weight of curious stares immediately. A woman in city clothes arriving in a rancher's wagon that was the kind of thing small towns noticed and remembered. "People are looking," she murmured. "People always look. They'll get bored eventually." But the stares didn't feel merely curious. A woman outside the general store whispered to her companion, both of them frowning in Grace's direction. A man on the boardwalk crossed his arms and watched the wagon pass with open suspicion. "Is something wrong?" Grace asked. Cole's jaw tightened. "Copper Springs has opinions about outsiders. They'll warm up once they see you're useful." It wasn't a reassuring answer. The wagon stopped in front of a weathered building with a hand-painted sign reading H. Morrison, M.D. The sign was indeed hanging crooked. Cole jumped down and came around to help Grace descend his hand strong and sure at her waist. I'll bring your bags in. That's not necessary. Didn't ask if it was necessary. Grace bit back a smile at his stubbornness and let him carry her carpet bag while she took her medical bag. The door opened before they reached it, revealing a wiry old man with wild white hair and spectacles perched on his forehead. Well, well. Dr. Morrison's voice was surprisingly strong for his age. The famous Grace Sinclair, I expected you yesterday. There was a complication with the stagecoach. She nearly died of heat exhaustion walking across the desert, Cole added flatly. Found her collapsed by my water trough. The doctor's bushy eyebrows shot up. Heat exhaustion, and you're standing here looking relatively intact. Either you're tougher than you look, young lady, or Cole here is a better nurse than he lets on. I just gave her water and a place to rest. Modest as always. Morrison stepped aside to let them enter. Come in, come in. Let's see what New Orleans sent me. The doctor's office was cluttered but clean, every surface covered with medical journals, instruments, and bottles of medicine. A curtained area in the back served as an examination room, and a narrow staircase led to what Grace assumed were living quarters above. Cole, thank you for delivering her safely. Morrison's dismissal was clear in his tone. Cole hesitated, his eyes finding Grace's. You'll be all right here. I'll be fine. Thank you, Cole, for everything. He nodded once, sharp and awkward, then was gone, and Grace felt his absence more keenly than she'd expected. Interesting, Morrison observed, watching her watch the door. What is nothing? Nothing. The old doctor waved dismissively. Now let's discuss your duties. I hope you weren't expecting gentle work, Miss Sinclair. I've returned to my maiden name. Morrison's expression softened slightly. Ah, the letter mentioned a deceased husband. Yellow fever. Yes. Terrible disease. Nothing anyone can do once it takes hold. He said it matter-of-factly without pity, and Grace appreciated that more than she could express. Well, Miss Sinclair, you've come to the right place if you want to feel useful. The mind produces injuries faster than I can treat them, and the town's been growing. Babies being born, children getting sick, the usual frontier ailments. I'm ready to work. Good, because your first patient is waiting. Morrison gestured toward the curtained area. Mining accident this morning, crushed hand. I've done what I can, but the bandaging needs changing, and someone needs to watch for infection. That someone is you. Grace set down her carpet bag and rolled up her sleeves. Show me. The miner's name was Thomas, a young man barely 20 with a hand that would never work properly again. He'd been awake for 3 hours, refusing the laudanum Morrison offered because he couldn't afford to be foggy, and when his shift supervisor came to assess whether he could still work. Miss, he nodded at Grace as she approached, his face pale with pain he refused to acknowledge. I'm Grace. I'll be changing your bandages. She kept her voice calm and steady the way she'd learned to do in New Orleans. It's going to hurt, but I'll be as gentle as I can. Can't hurt worse than it already does. It could, and it did. Grace worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wounds, checking for signs of infection, applying fresh bandages. Thomas gripped the edge of the cot with his good hand and didn't make a sound, though sweat beaded on his forehead. You're good at this, he said when she finished. I've had practice. Doc Morrison said you came from New Orleans. Long way to travel for a nursing job. It seemed like the right opportunity. Thomas studied her with eyes too old for his young face. Word of advice, miss, this town don't take kindly to outsiders, especially women who show up alone. I've noticed the stares. It ain't just stares you got to worry about. He lowered his voice. There's some folks here who got opinions about what women should and shouldn't do. Having a lady nurse treating men, some won't like it. Then they can find another nurse. Thomas almost smiled. You got spine. Good. You'll need it. Dr. Morrison appeared at the curtain. How's our patient? Healing cleanly so far. I'll need to check him again tomorrow. Excellent. Thomas, you can go. And for God's sake, take the laudanum tonight. Pain doesn't make you a better worker. After Thomas left, Morrison gave Grace a tour of the small clinic, explaining his systems and procedures. He was disorganized but brilliant, his mind sharp despite his age. By the time he finished, Grace felt cautiously optimistic about her new position. Then the door burst open and a woman stormed in. She was perhaps 50, dressed in expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the dusty mining town. Her face was set in lines of permanent disapproval, and her eyes fixed on Grace with immediate hostility. "So this is her." The woman's voice dripped with disdain. "The nurse from back east." Morrison sighed heavily. "Mrs. Blackwood, what a pleasant surprise." "Don't patronize me, Henry. I came to see for myself." She circled Grace like a hawk examining prey. "Young, unmarried, pretty, and you expect her to treat the men of this town to be alone with them in examination rooms." "I expect her to provide medical care to anyone who needs it," Morrison replied evenly. "Which is her job." "Her job." Mrs. Blackwood laughed, the sound sharp and cold. "A woman's job is to marry, keep house, and bear children, not to touch strange men under the pretense of medicine." Grace felt her temper rising but forced her voice to remain calm. "With respect, Mrs. Blackwood, nursing is a legitimate profession. Florence Nightingale herself—" "Don't lecture me about that English spinster." Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "I know why you're here, Miss Sinclair. You come from the city with your modern ideas thinking you can change how things are done, but Copper Springs has standards. Standards that let minors die from untreated injuries because there's not enough medical help." The words escaped before Grace could stop them, and she saw Morrison wince. Mrs. Blackwood went very still. "My husband owns the mines that employ half this town. You would do well to remember that before speaking so freely. And you would do well to remember that your husband's employees need medical care. That's why I'm here." For a long moment, the two women stared at each other. Then Miss Blackwood smiled, and it was the coldest expression Grace had ever seen. "We'll see how long you last, Miss Sinclair. This town has a way of driving out those who don't belong." She swept out, leaving silence in her wake. "Well," Morrison said after a moment, "you've made an enemy." "I noticed. Catherine Blackwood is the most powerful woman in Copper Springs. Her husband owns the mining company, and she considers herself the arbiter of social standards." He removed his spectacles and rubbed his eyes. "I should have warned you. Would it have changed what I said? No. That's what concerns me." But there was a hint of approval in his voice. "Come on, I'll show you to your room. You've had enough excitement for one day." Grace's room was small but private, located above the clinic. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. She unpacked her few belongings and sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. Mrs. Blackwood's words echoed in her mind. This town has a way of driving out those who don't belong. She'd heard similar sentiments in New Orleans from her mother-in-law's lips. "You don't belong in this family. You never did." Maybe she didn't belong anywhere. Maybe that was just her fate, to be perpetually outside looking in at lives she couldn't quite join. A knock at her door interrupted her dark thoughts. She opened it to find Maria standing in the hallway, a basket over her arm. "Maria, what are you doing here?" "Mr. Cole asked me to check on you, make sure the town hadn't eaten you alive yet." Maria entered without waiting for an invitation, setting the basket on the bed. "I brought food and information." "Information?" "About Catherine Blackwood." Maria began unpacking the basket: bread, cheese, dried fruit. "She's been the queen of this town for 20 years, and she doesn't like competition, especially from young, pretty women. I'm not competing with her for anything." "You don't have to be. Your existence is enough." Maria handed her a piece of bread. "Eat, you look too thin." Grace took the bread, realizing she hadn't eaten since breakfast. "How did you know about Mrs. Blackwood?" "News travels fast in small towns. By tomorrow, everyone will know you stood up to her." Maria smiled, but there was worry in her eyes. "That takes courage, but courage alone won't protect you from the Blackwoods." "I didn't come here looking for protection." "Maybe not, but you might need it anyway." After Maria left, Grace ate mechanically, her mind churning. She'd expected challenges in her new life: difficult work, harsh conditions, the isolation of the frontier. She hadn't expected to make powerful enemies on her very first day, but she hadn't survived losing. Thomas hadn't crossed the country alone, hadn't nearly died in the desert just to give up now. Catherine Blackwood could do her worst. Grace Sinclair had faced worse and was still standing. The next 2 weeks tested that resolve daily. Patients came to the clinic, but fewer than Morrison had predicted. Word had spread about the new nurse and Mrs. Blackwood's disapproval, and many townspeople were afraid to be seen seeking Grace's care. "They'll come around," Morrison assured her, "once they see you're competent. Hard to demonstrate competence when no one will let me treat them." Give it time. But time felt like a luxury Grace couldn't afford. She spent her days organizing the clinic, reading medical journals, and assisting Morrison with the patients who did come, mostly minors, whose injuries were too severe to wait for social approval. She saw Cole twice during those 2 weeks, both times briefly. The first time he came to the clinic with a ranch hand who'd gashed his arm on barbed wire. He stood in the corner while Grace cleaned and stitched the wound, his eyes following her every movement. "You're good," he said afterward. "Steady hands. Years of practice. That why you became a nurse, natural talent?" "That's why I stayed a nurse. I became one because my mother couldn't afford a doctor when she was dying, and I swore no one I loved would ever lack medical care again." Cole was quiet for a moment. "She died anyway." "Yes, when I was 16. I'm sorry." "So am I." Grace finished bandaging the ranch hand's arm. "Keep it clean and dry. Come back in a week for me to check the stitches." Cole paid for the treatment over her protests. "Doc Morrison can use the money." "So can you." "I don't need—" "Everyone needs money, Grace. Pride don't pay for food." He left before she could argue further. The second time she saw him was at the general store where she'd gone to purchase supplies. She was examining a bolt of fabric, practical cotton, for new work dresses, when a voice behind her made her freeze. "Well, if it isn't the city nurse." Grace turned to find a man she didn't recognize, tall and handsome, with an easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him stood two other men, their expressions equally unfriendly. "Can I help you?" "I'm Luther Kane Foreman, at the Blackwood Mine." He stepped closer, invading her space. "I've heard a lot about you, Miss Sinclair. Catherine Blackwood says you've got a smart mouth and loose morals." "Mrs. Blackwood doesn't know me." "She knows enough." Luther's smile widened. "A woman alone, no family, no husband, coming all the way to Arizona to put her hands on men. What kind of woman does that?" Grace felt her heart racing, but kept her voice steady. "The kind who knows how to set a broken bone. Would you like a demonstration?" The men behind Luther shifted uncomfortably, but Luther just laughed. "Feisty. I like that. Maybe we should get to know each other better. I could show you around town, introduce you to the right people." "I'm not interested." "You sure about that? Life can get real difficult for a woman without friends in a place like this." "Is that a threat, Mr. Kane?" "Just an observation." He reached out to touch Berman, and Grace stepped back sharply. "Don't touch me." "You heard the lady." Cole's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Grace hadn't heard him approach, but suddenly he was there, positioning himself between her and Luther. "Hartley." Luther's smile turned cold. "This ain't your concern. The lady said don't touch her. Seems like clear English to me." "And what are you going to do about it?" Sam didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "I reckon you don't want to find out, Jake. Not in front of witnesses." The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Luther laughed again, though it sounded forced. "No harm meant, just being friendly." He tipped his hat mockingly at Grace. "See you around, Miss Sinclair." After they left, Grace let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "Thank you. You shouldn't be out alone. Not while the Blackwoods are stirring up trouble." "I can't hide in the clinic forever." "No." Cole's jaw was tight with anger he was clearly suppressing. "But you can be careful. Luther Kane is dangerous. He's done things the sheriff can't prove, but everyone knows. Stay away from him." "I intend to." Cole walked her back to the clinic, his presence a solid barrier against the hostile stares they passed. At the door, he hesitated. "Grace." "Yes. If you need help, any kind of help, send word to the ranch. Day or night, I'll come." The simple offer, spoken with such quiet certainty, made her throat tight. "Why, you barely know me." "I know enough." His gray-blue eyes held hers. "I know you walked into the desert alone, rather than sit and wait for someone else to solve your problems. I know you stood up to Catherine Blackwood when most people just bow their heads. And I know you're too stubborn to ask for help even when you need it. Is that a compliment or a criticism?" "Both." Almost a smile touched his lips. "Take care of yourself, Grace Sinclair. He left and Grace watched him go, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. Yeah. The crisis came 3 weeks after her arrival. A collapse at the Blackwood mine trapped 17 men underground. Word spread through town like wildfire, and Grace ran to the mine entrance along with half the population of Copper Springs. The scene was chaos. Women crying, men shouting, dust still rising from the tunnel entrance. Richard Blackwood himself was there, a portly man with cold eyes who barked orders at his workers while showing no emotion about the men dying beneath his feet. "We need medical help down there," someone shouted. "Some of them are alive but injured." Dr. Morrison pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "I'll go." "Doc, you can't." A miner grabbed his arm. "The tunnel's unstable. We need someone who can move fast if it shifts again." Morrison looked at Grace and she understood. "I'll go." "Absolutely not." Catherine Blackwood's voice rang out. "That woman is not going anywhere near our miners." "Then who?" Grace demanded. "Doctor." "Morrison is 70 years old. If the tunnel collapses again, he won't be able to get out in time." She grabbed her medical bag, which she'd brought without thinking. "I'm going." "This is inappropriate. A woman in a mine." "People are dying, Mrs. Blackwood." Grace pushed past her. "Sue me for impropriety later." She didn't wait for permission. She followed the rescue workers into the darkness, her heart pounding but her hands steady. The tunnel was hell, dark, dusty, the air thick with the threat of collapse. Grace worked by lantern light, treating crushed limbs, stopping bleeding, directing the able-bodied survivors to help move the wounded. "You're doing great," she told a young man whose leg was pinned beneath a beam. "We're going to get you out of here." "You're that nurse," he gasped through his pain, "the one Mrs. Blackwood hates." "That's me." "Guess she was wrong about you." "Guess so." Hours passed. Grace lost track of how many wounds she treated, how many reassurances she offered, how many times the tunnel groaned ominously above their heads. She was covered in dust and blood, her dress ruined beyond salvage, her body screaming with exhaustion. But she kept working because that's what nurses did. When the last survivor was finally pulled from the tunnel, 15 of the 17 men rescued alive, Grace emerged into afternoon sunlight to find a crowd waiting. And at the front of that crowd stood Cole Hartley, his face pale with worry that transformed into relief when he saw her. "Grace," she walked toward him on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. "I'm all right, Oz. You're covered in blood." "Not mine, mostly." He caught her as she stumbled, his arms strong and sure around her. "I've got you." Grace let herself lean into him for just a moment, too exhausted to worry about propriety or what people might think. "The miners?" Cole asked quietly. 15 alive. You saved them." "Not alone. The rescue workers wouldn't have mattered without medical care." His voice was rough with emotion he wasn't quite hiding. "Doc Morrison has been telling everyone who'll listen, you're a damn hero, Grace Sinclair." She tried to protest, but he was already guiding her toward a waiting wagon. "Maria's got a bath ready at the ranch. You're coming with me." "I should stay. There might be more injuries." "Doc Morrison is handling it, and you're about to collapse." His tone broke no argument. "For once in your stubborn life, let someone take care of you." Grace was too tired to fight. She let him help her into the wagon, let him wrap a blanket around her shoulders, let him drive her away from the mine and the town and the staring eyes. Somewhere on the road to Mesquite Creek Ranch, she fell asleep against his shoulder. She woke to Maria fussing over her, helping her into a hot bath, washing the mine dust from her hair. Clean clothes appeared, a simple dress that belonged to Maria, too big, but wonderfully soft. "The whole town is talking about you," Maria said as she combed out Grace's hair. "The nurse who went into the mine when no one else would." "I just did my job." "You did more than that. You showed them who you really are." Cole was waiting when she came downstairs, standing by the fireplace with a cup of coffee he handed to her without a word. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to get me. Couldn't exactly leave you there." "You could have. Most people would have." He looked at her, then really looked, and Grace felt something shift between them. An acknowledgement of connection, of growing feelings neither of them had named. "I'm not most people," he said quietly, "and neither are you." They stood there in the firelight, close enough to touch, but not touching. And Grace understood that whatever happened next, nothing would be the same. She had come to Arizona to escape her past. Instead, she might have found her future. Grace stayed at Mesquite Creek Ranch for 3 days, and each day made leaving harder. Maria insisted she needed rest after the mine rescue. Cole said nothing but found reasons to be nearby, checking on her recovery, sharing meals, teaching her to ride properly in the desert heat. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, touching subjects neither had discussed with anyone else. On the second night, they sat on the porch watching lightning flash over distant mountains. "Tell me about your sister," Grace said quietly. Cole was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice rough with old pain. "Her name was Hannah, 5 years younger than me, always following me around, asking questions about everything." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "When I went off to war, she cried for 3 days. Made me promise I'd come back." "You did." "I did. But I wasn't the same. The things I saw, the things I did." He shook his head. "Hannah married a homesteader named William. Good man, hard worker. They settled 50 miles from here, trying to build something." Clara waited, sensing there was more. "She got pregnant within a year. Wrote me letters about how happy she was, how she couldn't wait to be a mother." Cole's hands tightened on the porch railing. "The baby came early. There was no doctor, no midwife, nobody who knew what to do. William wrote for help, but by the time he got back—" "I'm so sorry, Cole." "She bled to death alone in that cabin. 23 years old." His voice cracked. "If there'd been someone trained nearby, someone who knew how to help, she might have lived. Her baby might have lived." Grace understood then why he'd ridden through heat to help her, why he'd insisted on taking care of her after the mine collapse. It wasn't just kindness, it was atonement. "That's why you support Dr. Morrison's clinic," she said. "Why you're glad I came to Copper Springs." "Part of it." Cole turned to look at her, his eyes dark with emotion. "But only part." The air between them grew heavy with unspoken feelings. Grace's heart raced as Cole stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes. I ain't good with words, never have been. But these past weeks, having you here, getting to know you." He reached out his fingers, brushing her cheek with heartbreaking gentleness. "I haven't felt this way in a long time. Maybe ever." Clara's breath caught. "Cole, you don't have to. I know you're still healing from your husband. I know this is complicated, but I wanted you to know that I—" He stopped, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. "That you matter to me more than I expected, more than I know what to do with." She should have pulled away. Should have reminded him that she was a widow still carrying grief, that she'd come to Arizona to work, not to fall in love with a rancher she'd known for barely a month. Instead, she leaned into his touch. "You matter to me too," she admitted, "and it terrifies me." "Why?" "Because the last time I let myself love someone, I lost him. I watched him die despite everything I did to save him." Tears burned her eyes. "I don't know if I can survive that again." Cole's other hand came up to cup her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I can't promise you forever, Grace. Nobody can. But I can promise you right now. I can promise that as long as I'm breathing, I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe. That's not— It's all anyone can offer." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "The rest is just hope and stubbornness. And I've got plenty of both." Grace laughed despite her tears. "So I've noticed. Will you give us a chance, not rushing, not pushing, just seeing where this goes?" She knew she should say no. Knew that getting involved with Cole Hartley would complicate everything she'd come to Arizona to accomplish. But when she looked into his storm cloud eyes, caution seemed like a small price to pay for the warmth spreading through her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll give us a chance." Cole smiled, then a real smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. "Thank you." He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead, a kiss of promise rather than passion. Grace closed her eyes, memorizing the moment. Then Maria's voice rang out from inside the house. "If you two are done being romantic, dinner's getting cold." They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, and Grace felt heat flood her cheeks. Cole cleared his throat. "Rosa has no sense of timing. Or too much sense. We should go in." "Cole." She caught his hand before he could move. Whatever happens next, I want you to know I don't regret a single moment since I collapsed at your water trough. Neither do I. They walked inside together, and if Maria noticed their joined hands, she had the grace not to comment. But her knowing smile said everything. Grace returned to Copper Springs the next morning, and everything had changed. The mine rescue had transformed her reputation overnight. Miners who'd avoided her clinic now sought her out specifically. Women who'd crossed the street to avoid her nodded in greeting. Even the general store owner, who'd been coldly distant before, offered her a discount on medical supplies. "You earned it," he said gruffly. "My nephew was one of the men you pulled out." Catherine Blackwood's influence hadn't disappeared, but it had weakened. Enough people had seen Grace's courage with their own eyes that whispered accusations carried less weight. Dr. Morrison was waiting when she arrived at the clinic. "The conquering hero returns," he said dryly. "I've had 17 visitors asking when you'd be back. Apparently, I'm not good enough anymore." "That's not true." It's fine, it's fine." He waved away her protest. "I'm old enough to recognize when I'm being replaced by younger, prettier competition. I'm not replacing you." "No, you're succeeding me. There's a difference." Morrison's eyes softened behind his spectacles. "I came to Arizona 30 years ago, Grace. I've been waiting for someone worthy to carry on. After that mine rescue, I know I found her." Grace didn't know what to say. "Don't thank me yet. The work's only going to get harder." He handed her a list. "These are house calls that need making. Most of them wouldn't have let you through their doors a week ago. Now they're requesting you specifically." She took the list, scanning the names. "This will take all day." "Better get started then." Grace worked from dawn until after dark for the next 2 weeks. She treated infected wounds, delivered a babysit broken bones, and convinced 3 different miners to stop drinking whiskey as a substitute for medical care. She also saw Cole regularly. He came to town twice a week with excuses that grew increasingly transparent. Supplies that didn't need purchasing. Messages that could have been sent with a ranch hand. Questions about medical matters that had simple answers. Nobody believed his excuses, and he didn't seem to care. Their relationship progressed slowly, carefully. Both of them were aware of the obstacles they faced. Cole was a rancher with responsibilities that tied him to his land. Grace was a nurse with a calling that demanded her presence in town. They were 2 independent people trying to figure out how to build something together without losing themselves. "Come to the ranch for supper Saturday," Cole said during one of his visits. "Maria's been asking about you." "Maria or you, Dedham?" "Both." That rare smile she was learning to treasure. "Mostly me." Saturday came with summer monsoons that turned the sky green and angry. Grace almost canceled, but Cole arrived at the clinic anyway, driving through the threatening weather. "You didn't have to come," she said. "The storm?" "I said I'd be here. Storm's not that bad yet." It was very bad and getting worse. But Grace climbed into the wagon anyway, trusting Cole's judgment about the weather, even as thunder rolled overhead. They'd made it halfway to the ranch when the sky opened up. Rain came down in sheets so thick Grace could barely see the horses in front of them. Lightning cracked nearby, making both horses shy dangerously. Cole fought to control them, his jaw tight with concentration. "We need to find shelter," Grace shouted over the roar of the storm. "Line shack about a quarter-mile ahead. Hold on." The wagon lurched and bounced over terrain turned treacherous by the downpour. Grace gripped the seat with both hands, praying they'd make it before lightning found them, or the horses panicked completely. The line shack appeared through the rain like a ghost, mal-weathered but blessedly solid. Cole pulled the horses under a lean-to attached to the side and jumped down to help Grace. Inside now. They ran for the door, Cole's arm around her shoulders, both of them soaked within seconds. The shack was dark and smelled of dust and old hay, but it was dry and the walls blocked the worst of the wind. Cole struck a match, revealing a single room with a cot, a cold stove, and a shelf with canned goods. He lit a lantern while Grace stood shivering, her wet clothes clinging to her body. "There should be blankets in that chest," he said, not looking at her. "I'll see if I can get the stove going." Grace found the blankets, rough wool but clean, and wrapped one around herself while Cole coaxed flames from the stove. Within minutes, warmth began spreading through the small space. "How long will the storm last?" she asked. "Hard to say. These monsoons can blow through in an hour or settle in for the night." Sam turned from the stove, and Grace caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. You should get out of those wet clothes. Cole, you'll catch pneumonia otherwise. There's a spare shirt in the chest, should be big enough to serve as a dress. He turned his back. I won't look. Grace hesitated only a moment before practicality won over modesty. She stripped off her soaked dress and undergarments, wrapping herself in blankets while she searched for the shirt. It was one of Cole's, she realized, clean but clearly worn soft from many washings. She pulled it on and it fell to her knees like a nightgown. All right, she said. You can turn around. Cole turned and something in his expression shifted when he saw her wearing his shirt. His eyes darkened with an emotion that made Grace's breath catch. You should take off your wet clothes too, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Fair is fair. Grace, her name came out rough, almost pained. I'm being practical. You said so yourself, pneumonia. He held her gaze for a long moment. Then, without breaking eye contact, he stripped off his soaked shirt. Grace had seen men's bodies before. She was a nurse. But seeing Cole's body lean and muscled from years of ranch work, scarred in places that spoke of hard living and harder survival, was different. This wasn't a patient. This was the man she was falling in love with. Cole pulled a blanket around his shoulders and sat on the edge of the cot. Come here. Body heat's the best way to warm up. She should have refused, should have maintained proper distance despite the impropriety of their situation. Instead, she sat beside him, and when his arm came around her shoulders, she leaned into his warmth without hesitation. This is improper, she said without much conviction. We're sheltering from a storm. Nothing improper about survival. Is that what we're calling it? Cole's hand came up to tilt her face toward his. Grace, I've been wanting to kiss you properly since you woke up in my house and argued with me about leaving. I wasn't arguing. You were definitely arguing. His thumb traced her lower lip. May I? Yes. The first kiss was gentle, questioning. Cole's lips brushed hers like he was afraid she might break, and Grace felt tears prick her eyes at the tenderness of it. The second kiss was deeper. Grace's hands found his bare shoulders, feeling muscles shift beneath her palms as Cole pulled her closer. Heat that had nothing to do with the stove spread through her body. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole pressed his forehead against hers. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. I thought you should know. Cole, you don't have to. Say it back. I know you're still healing, still figuring things out. But I wanted you to know where I stand. Grace pulled back enough to look into his eyes. I'm scared. I know. I'm scared that I'll lose you like I lost Thomas. I'm scared that I'm not capable of loving anyone again. I'm scared that I'll mess this up somehow because I don't know how to be happy without waiting for tragedy. Cole listened without interrupting, his expression steady. But I'm also scared of not trying, she continued, of running away from this because it's easier than risking my heart. She took a shaky breath. I'm falling in love with you too, Cole. And it terrifies me more than the mine collapse, more than nearly dying in the desert, more than anything. So what do we do about it? Grace kissed him instead of answering, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into the contact. Cole responded in kind, his arms tightening around her like he never intended to let go. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, they held each other through the night, talking and kissing and making promises that felt both reckless and inevitable. When Grace finally fell asleep against Cole's chest, listening to his heartbeat beneath her ear, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death: peace. The storm broke before dawn, and they drove back to Copper Springs in the soft light of early morning. Grace knew there would be talk. There was always talk in small towns, and spending the night with Cole, however innocently, would fuel gossip for weeks. She found she didn't care. What she did care about was the man beside her who'd driven through a monsoon to keep a dinner invitation, who had kept his hands respectful even when every touch between them sparked with desire, who told her he was falling in love with her like it was the simplest truth in the world. I want to court you properly, Cole said as they approached town. Dinner at the restaurant, church on Sundays, the whole thing. So nobody can say I don't respect you. What people say doesn't matter to me. It matters for your work. You're fighting for acceptance here, and I won't be the reason that fight gets harder. His jaw set with familiar stubbornness. We do this right, Grace. for both our sakes. She wanted to argue, but she recognized the wisdom in his words. The mine rescue had shifted opinions in her favor. A scandal could shift them back. All right, she agreed. We do this right. Starting with dinner tonight if you're free, Clara smiled. I'll make time. They parted at the clinic, Cole's goodbye kiss, brief but promising. Grace watched him drive away with a warmth in her chest that even Catherine Blackwood's disapproval couldn't diminish. Inside, Dr. Morrison was waiting with a telegram in his hand and a troubled expression on his face. This came for you yesterday, he said, from New Orleans. Grace's warmth turned to ice. She took the telegram with suddenly trembling fingers. Urgent. Stop. Your presence required New Orleans. Stop. Thomas's estate in dispute. Stop. Mother-in-law claims fraud. Stop. Arrive immediately or forfeit all claims. Stop. The words blurred before her eyes. Grace, Morrison's voice seemed to come from far away. What is it? My past, she whispered. It's found me. Everything she'd built, everything she'd hoped for, suddenly it all hung in the balance, and she had no idea what she was going to do. But wait, she read the telegram again, her nurse's training kicking in to analyze the details with clinical precision. The sender wasn't identified. The wording was vague. Claims fraud, but what kind of fraud? The estate had been settled 2 years ago. Thomas's will was clear. Everything had been left to her legally. Unless Grace's blood ran cold. Unless Victoria Sinclair, Thomas's mother, had found a lawyer willing to make false accusations, to drag Grace through court, to destroy her reputation, to punish her for the crime of surviving when Thomas had not. Grace, Morrison touched her shoulder gently. What does it say? She handed him the telegram, unable to speak. Morrison read it quickly, his expression darkening. This is blackmail. It's revenge. You need to go to New Orleans. Fight this. If I go, I might lose everything here. The clinic, the patients who are just starting to trust me. Her voice broke. Cole, and if you don't go, I lose everything there. My credentials, my reputation, any money Thomas left me. Grace pressed her palm against her forehead, trying to think through the panic. She could claim I forged documents, that I manipulated Thomas while he was dying. Even if it's not true, the accusation alone could destroy me. Morrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what do you want to do? It was the question no one else had asked. Not what should you do, not what's the right thing, but what did Grace herself want? She thought about New Orleans, the city that had never truly accepted her, the family that blamed her for Thomas's death, the life she'd fled. Then she thought about Copper Springs, the clinic she was building, the patients who needed her woman, the community that was slowly, cautiously learning to trust her. And Cole, the man who'd saved her life, who'd stood beside her against Luther Kane and Catherine Blackwood, who'd told her he was falling in love with her in a storm-battered line shack. I want to stay, she said. I want to build my life here, but I can't let Victoria destroy everything I worked for back there. Then you go to New Orleans, Morrison said firmly. You fight, and you come back. What if I can't come back? What if, Grace, the old doctor gripped her shoulders, you survived losing your husband. You survived nearly dying in the desert. You survived going into a collapsing mine. You'll survive this too. A knock at the door interrupted them. Cole stood in the doorway, his expression worried. Maria said something was wrong, that a telegram came. Grace looked at him, this man who'd become so important to her in such a short time, and felt her heart break a little. I have to go to New Orleans, she said. My mother-in-law is accusing me of fraud. If I don't fight this, I'll lose everything. Cole's face went very still. When, as soon as possible, the telegram says immediately. How long? I don't know. Weeks maybe. A month if the legal proceedings drag out. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. Then I'm coming with you. Grace's head snapped up. What? To New Orleans. I'll come with you. Stand beside you. Make sure that woman knows you're not alone. Cole, you can't. The ranch, Pete can manage for a few weeks. He's done it before. So this isn't your fight. The hell it isn't. Cole cupped her face in his hands. I told you I was falling in love with you. Did you think those were just words? Did you think I'd let you face this alone? Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. I don't know how to let someone help me. I know. You've been fighting alone for so long you forgot how to accept support. He brushed her tears away with his thumbs. Let me teach you. Cole, we'll go to New Orleans together. We'll face your mother-in-law together. And then we'll come back here and build our life together. His voice dropped. If you'll have me. If I'll have you. Grace laughed through her tears. Cole Hartley, I've been yours since you carried me out of the desert. Is that a yeah? That's a yes. He kissed her, then deep and thorough tasting of salt and hope and promises. When they broke apart, Morrison was watching from the doorway with tears in his own eyes. About time, he said gruffly. Now both of you get out of my clinic. You've got packing to do. The next week passed in a blur of preparations. Grace arranged for Morrison to handle her patients during her absence. Cole made arrangements for Pete to manage the ranch. They booked passage on the Stagecoach East, then rail connections to New Orleans. News of their impending departure spread through Copper Springs with predictable speed. Some reactions were supportive. Thomas the miner, whose hand she'd treated on her first day, pressed a small pouch of coins into her hand. For the journey, he said gruffly. You saved 15 men in that mine. This is the least we can do. Others were less kind. Catherine Blackwood cornered Grace outside the general store, her eyes bright with malicious satisfaction. Running away so soon, Miss Sinclair, I knew you wouldn't last. I'm not running, I'm handling a legal matter. Is that what they're calling it now? Mrs. Blackwood smiled coldly. I heard about the fraud accusations. Seems I was right about you all along. Grace felt anger surge through her, but forced her voice to remain steady. You heard rumors. I wouldn't expect someone of your position to repeat unverified gossip. Mrs. Blackwood's smile flickered. Careful, Miss Sinclair. You don't have any friends left to protect you. That's where you're wrong. Cole's voice came from behind Grace, and she felt his hands settle on the small of her back. She has me, and anyone who spreads lies about her will answer to me. Mr. Hartley, Mrs. Blackwood's eyes narrowed. I didn't realize you'd lowered your standards. My standards are just fine. Can't say the same about your manners. Sam tipped his hat with cold courtesy. Good day, Mrs. Blackwood. He guided Grace away before Catherine could respond, his hand warm and protective against her back. You didn't have to do that, Grace said quietly. Yes, I did. The night before their departure, Grace lay awake in her room above the clinic, unable to sleep. In the morning, she would leave the life she'd built. She would face the woman who blamed her for Thomas's death. She would fight for her reputation, her career, her future. And Cole would be beside her. The thought brought comfort and terror in equal measure. She'd spent 2 years learning to stand alone, learning that depending on others only led to disappointment and loss. But Cole wasn't Thomas. He wasn't her father who'd failed to protect her from creditors and suitors. He wasn't her mother-in-law who'd seen her as an interloper from the start. Cole was a man who'd carried her out of the desert without expecting anything in return, who'd driven through a monsoon to keep a dinner date, who'd offered to cross the country to stand beside her at a hearing that had nothing to do with him. Maybe Grace thought learning to accept help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the bravest thing she could do. A knock at her door made her sit up sharply. Who's there? It's Maria. Grace opened the door to find Maria standing in the hallway, her face grave. What's wrong? There's someone here to see you downstairs. At this hour, Maria's expression told her this wasn't ordinary. You need to come now. Grace threw on a robe and followed Maria down to the clinic. A woman stood in the center of the room, her traveling clothes dusty and expensive, her face a perfect mask of controlled hostility. Grace's blood turned to ice. Hello, Clara, Victoria Sinclair said. Surprised to see me. What are you doing here? Did you think I'd wait in New Orleans while you concocted whatever story you're planning to tell? Victoria's eyes swept the modest clinic with obvious disdain. I came to see for myself what kind of life you've been living on my son's money. Thomas left that money to me legally, as his wife. His widow, you mean? A distinction you seem eager to forget given the rumors about you and some rancher. Victoria's lip curled. My son barely cold in the ground, and you're already spreading your legs for the next man who shows interest. Get out. I don't think so. I came a long way to have this conversation. Victoria stepped closer. I know what you did, Clara. I know how you manipulated Thomas. used your position as his nurse to make him dependent on you. You took advantage of a dying man. Thomas was not dying when we married. He got sick later. Convenient, wasn't it, that you were already legally entitled to everything when the fever took him? Grace's hands shook with rage she could barely contain. I loved Thomas. I spent 6 days trying to save his life while you sat in your parlor drinking tea. How dare you? How dare I? Grace's voice rose. You weren't there, Victoria. You didn't hold his hand while he burned with fever. You didn't hear him calling for his mother, who couldn't be bothered to visit until it was too late. Victoria's face went white. That's a lie. It's the truth. Thomas died asking where you were. Grace felt tears burning her eyes but refused to let them fall. And now you come here to this place I've built with my own hands and accuse me of fraud. You're the one who should be ashamed. For a moment, something flickered in Victoria's eyes, something that might have been doubt or grief or the first crack in her armor of certainty. Then the door burst open and Cole strode in. Grace Maria told me. He stopped, taking in the scene. Who the hell are you? I'm Victoria Sinclair. Victoria recovered quickly, her face hardening. Thomas's mother, and you must be the rancher my daughter-in-law has been whoring with. Cole moved so fast, Grace barely saw it. One moment he was by the door, the next he was standing between Grace and Victoria, his body a barrier of barely controlled fury. You will not speak to her that way. I'll speak to her however I please. She's the woman who killed my son. She's the woman who tried to save your son while you were too proud to come to his bedside. Cole's voice was deadly quiet. Grace told me everything. How you blamed her for not performing miracles. How you drove her out of the only home she'd ever known with your accusations. You don't know. I know enough. I know that Grace walked into a collapsing mine to save 15 strangers. I know she works herself to exhaustion, treating anyone who needs help, regardless of whether they can pay. I know she's got more courage in her little finger than you've shown in your entire life. Victoria took a step back, visibly shaken by Cole's intensity. This woman, Cole continued, is going to be my wife. And if you think I'll stand by while you destroy her reputation with lies, you don't know me at all. Wife, Clara whispered. Cole turned to her, his expression softening. I was going to ask properly after we got through this mess, but since the cat's out of the bag, he took her hand. Grace Sinclair, I love you. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me? The proposal in the middle of the clinic with her mother-in-law watching was ridiculous. It was also perfect. Yes, Grace said. God help me, yes. Victoria made a sound of disgust. This changes nothing. I'll still see you in court. Then we'll see you in court, Cole replied calmly, and we'll bring witnesses. Plenty of people in this town who can testify to Grace's character, including the sheriff, the mayor, and 15 miners whose lives she saved. The court is in New Orleans, not this God-forsaken wilderness. Courts listen to testimony no matter where it comes from, and I've got enough money to hire a lawyer who knows how to make them listen. For the first time, doubt crept into Victoria's eyes. She'd expected Grace alone, vulnerable, easily intimidated. She hadn't expected Cole Hartley. This isn't over, Victoria said finally. No, it isn't, but it will be, one way or another. Cole's voice was steel. You can spend the rest of your life trying to destroy Grace, or you can let Thomas rest in peace. Victoria stared at them both for a long moment. Then without another word, she turned and left. The silence she left behind was deafening. Cole turned to Grace, his expression worried. Are you all right? Grace laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. You just proposed to me in front of my dead husband's mother. Probably not my smoothest moment. It was perfect. She kissed him hard and desperate. It was absolutely perfect. So that's still a yes. That's a yes, you impossible man. She pulled back, her eyes bright with tears and joy. But we're still going to New Orleans. I know. And you're still coming with me. Try to stop me. Maria appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Does this mean I should start planning a wedding? Grace looked at Cole. Cole looked at Grace. Yes, they said together. And despite everything, the accusations waiting in New Orleans, the uncertainty ahead, the mother-in-law who might never accept her Grace felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. The journey to New Orleans took 12 days, and Grace spent every one of them preparing for battle. Cole sat beside her on trains and stagecoaches, reviewing documents, discussing strategy, listening when she needed to talk, and staying silent when she needed to think. He'd hired a lawyer by telegram before they left Arizona, a man named Frederick Marsh, who came highly recommended for handling estate disputes. "You sure about this?" Grace asked on the final day of travel as the humid air of Louisiana replaced the dry heat of Arizona. "There's still time to turn back." "Turn back from what? Defending my future wife against lies." Cole took her hand. "I told you, Grace, we face this together, betrayal." She'd spent 2 years learning to stand alone, learning that depending on others only led to disappointment and loss. But Cole wasn't others. They arrived in New Orleans late afternoon, and Grace felt the weight of memory pressing down on her. Every street held ghosts: the corner where she and Thomas had first talked, the church where they'd married, the house where she'd watched him die. "You all right?" Cole asked quietly. "No, but I will be." Frederick Marsh met them at their hotel, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s with an impressive mustache and an even more impressive reputation. "I've reviewed the case," he said, spreading documents across the sitting room table. "Mrs. Victoria Sinclair claims you exercised undue influence over her son during his illness, convincing him to change his will in your favor shortly before his death." "Thomas's will was written 6 months before he got sick," Grace said. "I have the original document." "I know. I've obtained a copy from the probate court." Marsh smiled grimly. "Mrs. Sinclair's lawyer either didn't check the dates or assumed you wouldn't have evidence. Either way, their case is built on sand." "Then why did she pursue this?" Cole asked. "Grief makes people do irrational things, and Mrs. Sinclair has resources to indulge her irrationality." Marsh looked at Grace directly. "The hearing is tomorrow morning. I'll present our evidence, call witnesses to your character, and request dismissal of all charges. With luck, this will be over by noon. And without luck, then we fight harder." Grace barely slept that night. She lay in the darkness of her hotel room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city she'd fled, trying not to think about everything that could go wrong. A soft knock at the connecting door made her sit up. "Grace, can I come in?" "Yes." Cole entered in shirt sleeves and trousers, his hair rumpled, his expression worried. "You should be sleeping." "So should you." "Can't seem to manage it." He sat on the edge of her bed. "Keep thinking about tomorrow, about what that woman's going to say. Please don't punch my mother-in-law in court." "I wasn't planning on punching her." He paused, maybe just glaring very intensely. Grace laughed despite herself. "Your glare is impressive. I've seen it scare horses." "Is that a compliment?" "Take it however you want." Cole took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Whatever happens tomorrow, it doesn't change anything between us. You know that, right?" "I know. Even if she wins, which she won't, you're still coming back to Arizona with me. You're still going to be my wife. We're still going to build a life together." "Cole, I mean it, Grace." He pulled her closer. "I don't care about money or reputation or what society thinks. I care about you. Everything else is just noise." She felt tears slip down her cheeks. "How did I get so lucky finding you of all people in the middle of nowhere, Arizona? You collapsed at my water trough. Wasn't exactly a fairy tale meeting. It was better than a fairy tale. It was real." She leaned forward and kissed him soft and sweet. "I love you, Cole Hartley." "I love you too, Grace Sinclair. Soon to be Grace Hartley." He pulled back with a crooked smile. "Now try to sleep. Tomorrow we win this thing." He stayed until she drifted off, his hand holding hers, his presence a promise of the future they would share. The courtroom was smaller than Grace expected and filled with faces she'd hoped never to see again. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in severe black, her expression triumphant. Beside her sat a slick-looking lawyer whose smile made Grace's skin crawl. Behind them, scattered through the gallery, were members of New Orleans society who had come to watch the spectacle. Vultures. "Just keep your temper," Cole whispered beside her. "Let Marsh handle it." The judge entered, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "We're here in the matter of Sinclair versus Sinclair. Mrs. Victoria Sinclair claims fraud in the estate of Thomas Richard Sinclair, deceased. Miss Grace Sinclair is the defendant. Are all parties present?" "Yes, Your Honor," both lawyers replied. "Then let's proceed. Mr. Chandler, present your case." Victoria's lawyer rose with practiced smoothness. Your Honor, my client has suffered tremendously since the death of her beloved son. She trusted that his estate would be handled properly only to discover that his wife, a woman of questionable background who wormed her way into his affections while serving as his nurse, manipulated a dying man into signing over his entire fortune. Grace felt Cole tense beside her as she put a hand on his arm in warning. We will present evidence, Chandler continued, that Grace Sinclair used her position of trust to isolate Thomas from his family, and that the will naming her sole beneficiary was signed under duress during his final illness. He went on for 20 minutes painting a picture of Grace as a calculating predator and Thomas as her helpless victim. Every word was designed to wound, and every word hit its mark. When Chandler finally sat down, Grace felt sick. Frederick Marsh rose slowly, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Chandler's theatrical performance. Your Honor, the plaintiff's case rests on a single assumption, that Thomas Sinclair's will was created during his illness under his wife's undue influence. Marsh held up a document. I have here a certified copy of that, will dated March 15th, 1880. Thomas Sinclair died in September of the same year. The will was created 6 full months before he contracted yellow fever. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Victoria's face went white. Furthermore, Marsh continued, I have testimony from the attorney who drafted the will confirming that Thomas Sinclair was in perfect health at the time of signing and expressed nothing but love and confidence in his wife. Objection. Chandler stood abruptly. This evidence wasn't disclosed. It's public record, Your Honor. The plaintiff's counsel could have obtained it themselves with minimal effort. The judge frowned. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Marsh. Marsh proceeded to dismantle Victoria's case piece by piece. He presented hospital records showing Grace's tireless efforts to save Thomas, letters from physicians praising her skill and dedication, testimony from nurses who'd worked alongside her. Then he called his final witness. The defense calls Dr. Henry Morrison. An elderly man rose from the gallery and made his way to the witness stand. Grace recognized him immediately, not Morrison from Copper Springs, but Dr. Henry Morrison of New Orleans, Thomas's personal physician. She hadn't known he was here. Dr. Morrison, Marsh began, you attended Thomas Sinclair during his final illness. I did, for the entire 3 weeks. And in your professional opinion, did Grace Sinclair exercise undue influence over her husband during that time? Dr. Morrison looked at Victoria with something approaching disgust. Mrs. Sinclair Grace did nothing but try to save that boy's life. She worked herself to collapse multiple times. She refused to leave his bedside even when I ordered her to rest. And Thomas Sinclair's feelings toward his wife, his voice hardened. He adored her, talked about her constantly when he was lucid, told me she was the best thing that ever happened to him. The courtroom was utterly silent. If anyone tried to influence that young man, Dr. Morrison continued, it wasn't Grace. She gave him nothing but love. Marsh turned to the judge. Your Honor, the plaintiff's case has no merit. The will was created months before any illness. Multiple witnesses attest to the genuine nature of the Sinclair's marriage. We request immediate dismissal with prejudice. The judge looked at Chandler. Does the plaintiff wish to respond? Chandler looked at Victoria, who sat rigid in her seat, her face a mask of barely contained fury. He leaned in to whisper something, and she shook her head violently. The plaintiff has no further arguments, Your Honor. Then I find for the defendant. The judge's gavel came down decisively. All claims of fraud are dismissed with prejudice. Mrs. Victoria Sinclair will pay court costs and is warned against pursuing further harassment of the defendant. It was over. Grace sat frozen, unable to believe it. Marsh was shaking her hand. Cole was pulling her into an embrace. People were talking all around her. She'd won. Grace, Cole's voice cut through the noise. Grace breathed. She took a shuddering breath and looked up at him. We won. We won. Then she was laughing and crying at the same time, clinging to Cole like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted back toward hope. Victoria didn't look at them as she swept out of the courtroom, Chandler following with his face red with humiliation. The society vultures scattered, disappointed by the lack of scandal, but Grace didn't care about any of them. She was free. They left New Orleans that same afternoon, neither of them wanting to spend another night in the city that held such painful memories. On the train platform, Grace paused to look back at the skyline one last time. Regrets, Cole asked. Only that I waited so long to leave the first time. She took his hand. Take me home, Cole. Arizona. Home is wherever you are. The journey west felt different than the journey east. Lighter. Grace slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, her head on Cole's shoulder, his arm around her. They talked about the future, the ranch, the clinic, the wedding Maria was undoubtedly planning in elaborate detail. I want to keep working, Grace said. At the clinic, Dr. Morrison needs me. I know. And I want to build a small medical facility near the ranch for emergencies so nobody else dies because help is too far away. Cole was quiet for a moment. Like my sister. Yes, like Hannah. He pulled her closer. I think that's a wonderful idea, Grace. You're going to be my wife. Your dreams are my dreams. We'll build that facility together. They arrived in Copper Springs 2 weeks after they'd left, and the town that greeted them was very different from the one Grace remembered. Word had spread about the trial, about her vindication about Cole's proposal. People lined the main street waving and cheering as their wagon passed. Thomas the miner, Dr. Morrison, his eyes suspiciously bright, Maria openly weeping with joy. Even some of Mrs. Blackwood's former allies had shifted their allegiance, eager to be seen supporting the town's returning hero. What is happening? Grace whispered, overwhelmed by the reception. You're happening, Cole replied. You showed them who you are, and they finally listened. Maria reached them first, throwing her arms around Grace before she'd even descended from the wagon. Mija, you're home. We've been counting the days. Grace looked around at the crowd. The whole town, Dr. Morrison said, appearing beside them with a grin. I closed the clinic to organize a welcome celebration. Can you believe it? Grace couldn't. 2 months ago, half these people had crossed the street to avoid her. Now they were celebrating her return. People change, Cole said, quietly reading her thoughts. You gave them reason to. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Grace accepted congratulations and well wishes until her face hurt from smiling. She danced with Cole, then with Dr. Morrison, then with Thomas, and what seemed like half the male population of Copper Springs. As the festivities wound down, she found herself standing apart watching the community that had become her home. Quite a journey you have been on. Dr. Morrison appeared beside her, offering a cup of punch, from collapsing in the desert to becoming the town darling. I'm not sure about darling. Trust me, half the women in town want to be you, and the other half want to be your best friend. He smiled. You've done something remarkable here, Grace. Something that will last long after I'm gone. Don't talk like that. You've got years left. Maybe, maybe not, but either way, I know the clinic is in good hands. He squeezed her shoulder. Your mother would be proud. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, Dr. Morrison, for everything. Thank yourself. You did the hard work. I just provided the opportunity. Cole appeared, taking Grace's hand, ready to go home. Home. She looked around at the people still celebrating, at the town that had finally accepted her, at the man whose hand she held. Yes, I'm ready. They drove to Mesquite Creek under a canopy of stars, the Arizona night cool and clear. Grace leaned against Cole's shoulder, watching the familiar landscape pass by. Cole, ask me again. Ask you what? What you asked in the clinic when Victoria was there. He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to face her, his expression soft in the moonlight. Grace Sinclair, will you marry me? Yes. She kissed him long and deep. 1,000 times, yes. They were married 3 weeks later in a ceremony that brought together everyone who had touched their story. Dr. Morrison gave Grace away, crying through the entire ceremony. Maria served as matron of honor, also crying. Thomas and his fellow miners formed an honor guard. Even Catherine Blackwood attended, her expression sour, but her presence an acknowledgement of changed circumstances. Richard Blackwood had finally put his foot down, Grace learned later. Either Catherine accepted the new reality or found somewhere else to live. The wedding took place at sunset with the Arizona mountains glowing pink and gold. Grace wore a simple white dress that Maria had helped her sew. Cole wore a new suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders but looked perfect anyway. When the minister asked if anyone objected, Cole turned and glared at the congregation with such intensity that several people laughed. No one objected. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Cole kissed her like no one was watching, and Grace kissed him back the same way. The celebration that followed was the biggest Copper Springs had ever seen. Food and music and dancing that lasted until dawn. Children running between adults' legs, old grudges forgotten in the spirit of new beginnings. As the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, Cole led Grace away from the lingering festivities. Ready to go home, Mrs. Hartley? Grace looked back at the community that had become her family. Then she looked at the man who had become her everything. I've been ready since you carried me out of the desert. They rode to Mesquite Creek Ranch as the sun rose over the mountains, painting the landscape in shades of gold and promise. Maria had breakfast waiting when they arrived, along with a bedroom filled with flowers and a note that simply said, "Welcome home." Cole carried Grace over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition and the joy in the sheer improbability of their story. "Any regrets?" he asked, setting her down gently. "Only one." His face fell. "What?" "That I didn't collapse at your water trough sooner." He laughed, pulling her close. "You're stuck with me now, Grace Hartley, for better or worse. Promise. Promise." Outside, the Arizona sun climbed higher, bringing another summer day of endless possibility. Inside, two people who had thought their chances at happiness were gone forever held each other close and let themselves believe in second chances. 6 months later, Grace stood in the doorway of the new medical facility, watching workers put finishing touches on the building that would serve families for miles around. The Hannah Hartley Memorial Clinic. Named for the sister Cole had lost, it would ensure that no other woman died alone, far from help for want of trained medical care. Dr. Morrison would retire soon, handing over his Copper Springs practice to Grace entirely. But this new clinic, smaller, simpler, focused on emergencies and obstetric care, was her project. Her dream made real. Cole appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's necessary." "That too." He kissed her temple. "Hannah would have loved it." Grace turned in his arms, taking his hands and placing them on her still flat belly. "There's something I need to tell you." Cole's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Grace?" "About 3 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I said anything." "We're going to have a baby?" "We're going to have a baby." He swept her up, spinning her around, laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, there were tears in his eyes. "What do we name them?" he asked. "If it's a girl," I thought, "Hannah." "Hannah," Cole's voice broke. "And if it's a boy, Thomas, to remember the people we loved and couldn't save, and to remind us that no matter how painful the past, we can still create a beautiful future." They stood there as the sun warmed the desert, two people who had been lost and found each other, who had turned grief into hope and fear into love. "I need to tell you something too," Cole said after a moment, "about my past, about who I was before you knew me." Grace felt her heart skip. "All right. Before I bought the ranch, I did things I'm not proud of. I worked as hired muscle for mining companies, drove people off their land, hurt people who didn't deserve it." He took a shaky breath. "One of those people, a father I forced off his property. He killed himself a year later. Left a wife and 3 children with nothing. I've carried that with me every day since." Grace reached up to touch his face. "Thank you for telling me. You're not horrified. I'm sad for that family. I'm sad for the man you had to be back then. But I know who you are now, Cole. I know the man who saves women from the desert, who drives through storms to keep promises, who builds clinics to honor his sister's memory. The past doesn't just go away. No, but it doesn't have to define us either." She took his hand. "We both carry ghosts, Cole. Thomas, Hannah, the people we couldn't save. But we're building something good from that grief. Something that matters." "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." They walked together to the grave marker Cole had placed on the ranch, a simple stone that read, "Hannah Hartley, beloved sister, gone but not forgotten." Grace laid wildflowers at the base, the same desert blooms she'd carried at their wedding. "We're naming our daughter after you," Cole told his sister's grave, his voice thick with emotion. "And we're going to make sure what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Grace stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, the other resting on her belly, where new life grew. They stood in silence as the wind moved through the desert grass, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. "Do you think she'd approve?" Cole asked. "Of us, of the clinic. I think she'd be proud of the man you have become. I know I am." They stayed until the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. As they walked back toward the ranch house, their home, the life they'd built together, Grace thought about the journey that had brought them here. She'd come to Arizona running from grief, from accusations from a past that threatened to define her forever. She'd nearly died in the desert heat, alone and broken. But a cowboy had found her, a man with his own ghosts, his own guilt, his own desperate need for redemption. Together they had built something neither could have created alone. A love that healed wounds, a partnership that made them both stronger, a future that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. Grace Hartley, formerly Sinclair, formerly just Grace, had learned that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best beginnings. That sometimes falling down is exactly what you need to find your way home. She had collapsed at a stranger's water trough, certain that nobody was coming to save her. But Cole Hartley had lifted her gently into his wagon and carried her toward a future neither of them could have imagined. And that Grace knew with absolute certainty was exactly where she was meant to be. Thank you for staying with Grace and Cole until the end of their journey. Their story reminds us that no matter how dark our past, redemption is possible when we find the courage to face the truth and the grace to forgive both others and ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more emotional Western romance tales. Share this with someone who believes in second chances. What did you think of Grace and Cole's story? Were you surprised by Victoria's final transformation? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, remember, even in the harshest desert, love can bloom.